We've spoken repeatedly about the need for the states to be redrawn. Now, we've finally done something about it. I and about 60 community members came together for the Balkanization Proclamation to redraw the states of the United States to account for culture, geography, economics, politics, and more. The result is this new map of about 80 states and territories, and every state having a population of at least 1 million and straight lines virtually abolished across the map in favor of geographic boundaries following rivers and mountain ranges. In this video, we'll be going over every state in the eastern half of the country and its justification for existence. This video turned out longer than expected, so we'll be covering the western states in a second video soon after. Hello audience, Mr. Z here with another video for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Now before we go any further, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who has donated to us on Patreon and right here on YouTube through channel memberships. Having dealt with demonetization and even censorship in the past, especially when covering more sensitive topics, support from our patrons and donors helps make regular videos possible. Every donation goes a long way to keeping our channel going, and as a show of thanks, if you donate to help support the channel, you'll gain access to some great perks, including physical merchandise, a custom-designed flag wallpaper, and access to an exclusive members-only Discord server where you can enter your scenarios for a chance to have them made into full videos, or just chat with me in the community directly. You can follow the pop-up on screen here, go to the description or comment section to visit our Patreon page and support our channel, and of course you can do so by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button right below this video. If you can't donate anything, please consider subscribing and sharing this video to help the channel out. Now, back to the video. Beginning in the northeast and working our way westward, we have the state of Maine. Having expanded the state to include portions of northern New Hampshire at the expense of its southern coastline, this incarnation of Maine is primarily defined by its wooded rural interior. Culturally, the region is largely Anglo and French. Religiously, it holds a significantly higher Protestant population than its surroundings, primarily Anglican and Baptist, and politically it could be considered relatively conservative and libertarian. The state's economy is chiefly built on resource extraction, namely forestry and fishing, as well as recreation with a small degree of manufacturing. Just to the south of Maine, we have the new state of Saco, a region comprising portions of the former states of Maine and New Hampshire with a higher level of development, urbanization, and secularization, as well as with a stronger emphasis on a coastal maritime culture. Ethnically, the region is largely Anglo and Irish, religiously it is relatively secular, and politically is fairly progressive. Economically, Saco is notable for its high-tech manufacturing and recreation sectors. The final state along the New England coast is Massachusetts, its borders having been redefined to fit an area largely under the influence of the Boston Metro, and demonstrates significantly more development and urbanization than Saco. Also a largely maritime and coastal state, Massachusetts is overwhelmingly Irish with significant Italian and Portuguese minorities. It is predominantly Catholic and secular, and politically could be considered quite progressive. I had been tempted to combine the Boston, New York, and Philadelphia metro areas into a single megalopolis state. However, it was decided by the community that the cultures of these three, as well as the economic needs of the three, were distinct enough to justify making them their own states. Massachusetts has a diverse, urbanized economy, though with a specialty in high-tech manufacturing. Moving inland, we find the state of Vermont, largely untouched save for the notable adoption of a small stretch of territory in New York right across Lake Champlain. Vermont is very secular, dominantly English with a large French minority, and politically very progressive. Economically, it shares a similar recreation and high-tech manufacturing economy with Saco. West of Vermont, we find the new state of Seneca, a region of the former state of New York largely defined by its lakeside culture, whether in the Adirondacks, the Finger Lakes, or along the Great Lake of Ontario. Seneca is largely rural, but houses various small cities with industrial histories like Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, and Rome, not to mention the large military base of Fort Drum. Economically, this gives Seneca a mixed economy that features prominently heavy industry, resource extraction, recreation, and the public sector, particularly military fields. Ethnically, it is largely English, Irish, and German. Religiously, it is largely Catholic, and politically, it could be considered relatively labor-oriented with a mix of both liberal and conservative social views. There was some debate over the status of the Adirondacks and if they truly fit in with the rest of Seneca. However, given the region's low population disqualifying it from being its own state, it was ultimately decided that the Adirondacks would be more at home with the state of Seneca than with Vermont or Albany. Just south of Vermont and Seneca is the state of Albany, a relatively suburban state characterized by the Albany and western Springfield metro areas, as well as by its history as an early hub of development in the northeast, fueled by settlement and commerce along the Hudson and Connecticut rivers. Albany is largely Irish and Italian, predominantly Catholic, and politically labor-oriented but fairly progressive, especially given the historic influence of New York City, Boston, and Hartford upon the cities of Albany and Springfield. Economically, the region is defined by its administrative and recreational labor sectors. There was consideration for Albany and Seneca to be united, but given how far removed Albany was from Lake Ontario and the general lake culture of Seneca, not to mention its relatively higher level of development, it was decided that Albany was better off as a state of its own. What remains of the state of New York is defined by the greater New York City metro area, a region of course defined by its significant level of development, interconnectivity, and urbanized economy, not to mention its distinct coastal culture. The state has a largely Catholic plurality and is also largely Italian and Irish, but is far more diverse than the previously mentioned states, with significant Hispanic, Asian, and African American minorities. Politically, New York is very progressive. Naturally, Staten Island and the latter counties of Long Island were topics of debate, and while they too are far more suburban than Manhattan proper and exceed the 1 million population threshold to qualify as a state, the exclusion of either would have created a conundrum given how deeply interconnected they are to the New York metro area. One solution I considered was that Manhattan, the Bronx, and Hudson County be merged into a separate city-state while the whole of Long Island, including Brooklyn and Queens, remain a part of the state of New York, thus reducing the heavy urban influence of the urban core upon its more suburban constituents. South of New York is the new state of Philadelphia, another state defined by its large metro area, much like New York and Boston. Ethnically, the state is largely German, Italian, and Irish, and predominantly Catholic, while politically the region is fairly progressive with a large urbanized and diverse economy. There was significant debate over who the Delmarva Peninsula should go to, but ultimately was decided that given the significant migration to the peninsula from the Philly metro area over the years and the seeming transformation of the more highly populated east coast of the peninsula into an essential suburb of Philly, Delmarva was decided to be culturally linked to the state of Philadelphia, the largely Methodist population of the southern peninsula being too distinct to be given to any other state, yet too small to be made its own state. Descending further south, we encounter the new state of Columbia, an essential greater Washington, D.C. which expands to include Baltimore and the counties of Northern Virginia. A largely urban and suburban community, Columbia is predominantly African American with large Anglo, German, and Irish minorities. Religiously, the state is a mix with notable Catholic, Protestant, and secular populations, and the economy of the state is largely based on political and administrative services. Politically, the region is largely progressive, though conservative elements do exist. There were considerations to give at least portions of the Delmarva Peninsula to Columbia given the historic significance of the Chesapeake and the large African populations in the southern peninsula. However, once again, because of the more direct impact the Philadelphia metro area has upon the peninsula, it was decided that the whole of the peninsula should go to Philly, as a partition of the peninsula might have proven unsightly and the demographic differences were likely to self-correct through voluntary interstate migration from the peninsula to Columbia over time. Not even mentioning trends in population growth and shrinkage in both the north and the south. North of Columbia, we have the new state of Susquehanna. Largely comprising the region of the lower Susquehanna watershed, the state is largely rural and suburban, economically agricultural and recreational, though with pockets of light manufacturing. Susquehanna is largely Protestant, particularly Lutheran, and is ethnically very German. Politically, the region is fairly conservative as well. North of Susquehanna, we have Pennsylvania, with its borders extending into the southern tier of New York. Pennsylvania largely encompasses lands of Protestant German background, with a notable number of Methodists, albeit not in majority numbers. These are rural and mountainous Middle America type communities with elements of Rust Belt and Coal Belt economics, of course meaning that mining and manufacturing feature as prominent economic sectors. Politically, the region is labor-oriented but very socially conservative. West of Pennsylvania, we find the new state of Allegheny. Similar to its Pennsylvania neighbor, Allegheny embodies similar labor-oriented politics, however is more thoroughly developed and is more squarely a part of the Rust Belt region with significant industry across much of its land. Allegheny is largely German with a mixture of both Protestant and Catholic adherents. It is politically mixed, though it does lean conservative. The culture of Allegheny is more directly influenced by Appalachian culture than Pennsylvania proper, despite Allegheny's higher level of overall development. To the north of Pennsylvania and Allegheny is the state of Erie, a highly developed Great Lake and Rust Belt state, though naturally one which has suffered as a consequence of deindustrialization. The Great Lake of Erie unites 5 major cities along its coast: Buffalo, Erie, Cleveland, Toledo, and of course Detroit. Predominantly Irish, African, and German, Erie is dominantly Catholic and largely supports left-leaning pro-labor policies. There was consideration to break this state up among others, but a consistent trend we found with the Great Lakes is that many of the cities along any individual lake tended to share significant similarities in demographics, economics, and interests. This, when paired with the interconnectivity facilitated by the individual Great Lakes, made it a natural conclusion to group these similar cities together along their respective lakes. Moving north to Huron, we have a largely rural and suburban community littered with small cities and towns along the coastline. Largely English and German, religiously the state is a mixture of Protestant and Catholic adherents and is generally conservative. Economically, Huron has a dominantly recreation-based economy with elements of resource extraction and small amounts of industry. Just due south of Huron is the state of Michigan, demographically similar to its northern neighbor, albeit with a noteworthy Dutch minority. Michigan is also distinguished by its significantly higher level of development in comparison to its northern neighbor, with heavy manufacturing standing as the dominant economic sector. Michigan is fairly conservative and naturally very labor-oriented. The new state of Chicago was a similar such case as Erie, where from Milwaukee to Benton Harbor there was an almost uninterrupted stretch of urbanization under similar conditions. We extended this border up to Green Bay to produce a largely urban and suburban state, predominantly Catholic in faith and ethnically a mix of Irish, German, and Polish, with a minority of African Americans. Naturally, this state has a diverse and urbanized economy, but among its sectors, manufacturing still features very prominently. Moving further north, we have the new state of Superior, formed out of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, parts of Minnesota, and the remainder of Wisconsin. Another largely Catholic state, Superior has the typical Midwestern mix of Anglo, Irish, and German Americans, with a significant minority of Finns. It is largely rural and fairly conservative, with both recreation and manufacturing featuring among its most prominent economic sectors. Now moving southward, we find the new state of Madison, an interior urban and suburban Midwestern state with a significant Catholic population of Anglo-Irish extraction. The state shares with Superior an economy based in recreation and industry, but also carries the job diversity of an urban economy. Politically, Madison leans progressive. South of Madison is the state of Illinois, what remains of this state being primarily agricultural and suburban prairie lands, socially conservative and a mix of German Protestant background. West of Illinois is the state of Harrison, a state comprising much of the interior Midwest. Largely Protestant and ethnically German and English, Harrison shares a notable degree of development with its coastal neighbors in spite of not sharing the same coastal culture. Because of this, the inland suburbs of Harrison play a much more significant role in the overall function of the state, whose economy is based largely in manufacturing. Despite its relatively high level of development and pro-labor politics, Harrison is a very socially conservative state. East of Harrison is Ohio, reduced from its metro areas to encompass the Ohio River Valley-centric southeast of the state. This region is only somewhat industrial and has historically played host to coal mining, however is in need of some revival, and unlike the rest of the state, does not have a strong agricultural economy, being heavily forested and covered in hills similar to the Appalachian Hill Country. As such, recreation and administrative occupations have begun seeing a rise in the region in recent years. Regardless, this area still maintains a somewhat Midwestern character, especially with its accent being more defined by the Midwest by and large than the Appalachian dialects. It is settled primarily by Americans of German descent, though cross-river migration by the Scotch-Irish was and still to this day is fairly common. Religiously speaking, it is predominantly Methodist as opposed to the general mixed Protestantism with some Catholic elements found throughout the state that was once Ohio. South of Harrison is the state of Hoosier, a state largely comprising the rural coal belt regions of the former states of Indiana and Illinois. Not too dissimilar from Ohio, Hoosier represents something of a transitional land between the Midwest and Appalachia. Hoosier is largely non-denominational and Baptist and of Anglo-German ancestry. Economically, the state is largely defined by its mining and manufacturing sectors, and politically is very conservative and pro-labor. Westlvania encompasses the central core of the Appalachian Mountains and is predominantly dominated by the Northern Appalachian dialect, with some of the Southern dialect being present in eastern Kentucky. It is heavily settled by the Scotch-Irish and also is religiously mixed between a large number of Protestant sects, with none forming a solid majority. Economically, this area is dominated by coal country, with some industrial presence primarily along the Ohio River and in the Huntington-Charleston metro. Politically, this state is very conservative and pro-labor. Kentucky was reduced to encompass its core bluegrass region, excluding its Mississippi River Valley region and Appalachian region, which both have more in common with their nearby areas. Kentucky was expanded north of the Ohio River to include Cincinnati, which is far more integrated into the triangular metro region between Lexington, Louisville, and Cincinnati itself, similar to the Texas Triangle but with more cultural commonality. Kentucky is more economically mixed than its neighbors, boasting noteworthy agricultural, mining, and manufacturing fields. The common identity between the three cities of the state is further accentuated by the mixed Baptist-Methodist population found in the metro area. Like much of the rest of Appalachia, Kentucky is predominantly Scotch-Irish and very conservative but pro-labor. Hatchie encompasses the far less distinctly African and far more white western regions of Tennessee and Kentucky. This area is based mostly around the Mississippi River agriculturally, with a significant area of forest cover around the Cumberland River, separating it geographically from Kentucky and Tennessee. Further, the region also had historically and continues to be recognized as a distinct region of Tennessee, with it actually being represented as one of the 3 stars on Tennessee's flag. It is largely Scotch-Irish, Baptist, and conservative with a notable manufacturing economy. Tennessee was reduced to encompass its central core region, primarily being flat land caught between its Appalachian and Mississippi River Valley segments. Its border in the north follows the Tennessee River, however it stretches partially north to encompass the full Nashville metro. It was expanded slightly south of the Cumberland River, which includes the Huntsville metro, which is far more aligned with the upland south and the Piedmont region. It is largely Baptist and primarily settled by a mix of English and Irish settlers. It is notably more developed than the other two regions of what was once Tennessee, and boasts a significant manufacturing and urban economy. Franklin encompasses the region of southern Appalachia, being made up of land from several surrounding states, with its heartland being around the Great Appalachian Valley. It is dominated by the Southern Appalachian dialect and is largely Scotch-Irish. In addition to this, the communities in this area are far less industrial than their Northern Appalachian counterparts, with far more ties to the South than the generally Ohio River-based states of West Sylvania and Allegheny. Virginia's borders have been reduced to encompass lands historically central to Virginian identity and which retain a shared overall culture. It is predominantly Anglo and Scotch-Irish, Baptist, largely suburban, and a largely administrative economy with some manufacturing elements in the South. Politically, it is a mix of conservatives and liberals. Tidewater encompasses the coastal lands of southern Virginia and the former state of North Carolina. Largely English and Protestant with a minority of African Americans and a significant population of Methodists, Tidewater has a largely leisure and tourism-based economy, though also having large communities rooted in port commerce, transportation technology, and pharmaceuticals. Politically, Tidewater is also mixed, though it leans more toward the left. Carolina's borders have been adjusted to include areas of close cultural similarity both within what was once North Carolina and within Georgia. Carolina is another predominantly English and Baptist state with a significant African American minority. Economically, Carolina is primarily based in manufacturing and recreation. Also somewhat politically mixed on account of its large African American population, South Carolina is broadly socially conservative but varies on other issues. Georgia, despite having lost lands to the north, has regained lands in the south through the annexation of culturally identical lands within Florida. It is predominantly English and Baptist, economically agricultural with elements of manufacturing, and is predominantly conservative. Florida, having been reduced to the territory of Central Florida, is a relatively diverse state with large numbers of Anglos, Germans, Italians, Irish, Africans, and Hispanics, as well as a religious composition which is broadly Christian, seeing significant numbers of both Catholics and Protestants. Chiefly another leisure and recreation-based economy, Florida does retain significant communities of high-tech manufacturing. Politically, Central Florida is mixed, but holds a strong conservative lean. Miami encompasses the south coastal areas of what was once Florida and is predominantly Cuban and Italian, Catholic, and although it is politically a mixed bag with a liberal lean, the politics of the state can be described as somewhat libertarian. Like its northern neighbor, it has a significant leisure economy with high-tech manufacturing elements. Atlanta, having been separated from Georgia, is predominantly African American with a significant English minority. It is largely Baptist and secular with a diverse urban economy notable for its specialization in telecommunications and tech. Politically, it is of course very progressive. Monroe encompasses the Gulf coastal lands of the South and like other southern states is largely English and Baptist. Economically, the region is similar to Tidewater with a noteworthy recreation economy, but also emphasizing port commerce and high-tech transportation, manufacturing, and development. Douglas represents a population of majority African Americans along the Black Belt in the South. It is somewhat agricultural with light manufacturing elements, predominantly Baptist and socially conservative, albeit with a strong emphasis on labor politics and pro-black issues. Alabama's borders have been adjusted to represent the largely Scotch-Irish and culturally Appalachian interior of the South and form yet another predominantly Baptist state. Alabama's economy is largely based in manufacturing, and politically the state is very conservative. Mississippi encompasses another majority African population along the east bank of the Mississippi River. Politically, the region is socially conservative with a strong labor focus and of course pro-black policy. Religiously, it is overwhelmingly Baptist, and economically the state has a mixed economy that features recreation, manufacturing, and agriculture. Last but not least, with its borders based around the Mississippi River Delta, New Orleans is a state shaped by its relationship to river and seaside commerce. It is, of course, a diverse urban economy, but also has strong manufacturing and administrative sectors. Culturally, it is an amalgam of Southern and Old Colonial French culture. Ethnically, it is largely English and French, with a noteworthy African American population. Religiously, it is largely Catholic, with a notable Protestant minority, and politically, it is a primarily labor-focused state. That covers about half of all the new states, and like I said, we'll be covering the other half very soon. I want to thank everyone who came together to discuss and plan out these new borders. A big thanks to my pal Hunter for putting the map together, and again to everyone in the Discord server. If you don't see your name here and want to be credited, let us know and we'll feature you up in part 2. This was definitely a blast to do. I've been talking about the need to redraw state borders for a good while, and this was both a fun opportunity and a very educational thought experiment in where the priorities, where the culture, where the policy of each of these hypothetical states would lie. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.